Hello and welcome to the first instalment of Discussing Darkness, a supplementary pod to our Fantasy Age campaign. Now, this particular episode won't have so much discussion in it, as I'm going to be summarising our story so far so that you can join us on Twitch when we stream our 11th episode. But what will this podcast normally be about? Well, it will be an opportunity for the players, some guests and I to discuss aspects of our campaign in Uri, the lore, what's happened. We're also going to discuss a little bit about the Fantasy Age system, maybe give you a bit of an insight into how it works and some tips and advice on running a game. But also, we'll maybe talk about some tabletop RPGs in general, as a few of the team are all DMs and we play all sorts of different systems. But, as already said, with us hitting our 10th episode, we thought it would be a great idea by actually sharing our story so far. Now, whilst we'd love you to listen to all our episodes, we really do understand that some people may just wish to jump straight into the action, especially if you want to join us as we launch on Twitch. Now, Fantasy Age in general, something that we're going to talk about in future episodes of Discussing Darkness. It's a brilliant 3d6 system that personally I think is wonderful for casual gaming and also story-driven games. It's published by Green Ronin Publishing. They're a great company and you should most certainly check them out. If you do, make sure to use the code follow_RPG_Insta for 15% off anything in their store. So that's follow_@wreckage_RPG_Insta, and that will get you 15% off anything in their store. Well, so you've listened to the first 30 seconds of this podcast, and you've already got yourself a nice store discount. Anyway, without further ado, let me tell you about the Tale of Uri and about the start of our campaign. Many tales and legends talk of the World Tree at the centre of the universe, a place where the gods of old were brought into existence, where they lived and where they began to influence all they touched. These old gods guided the growth of the World's Tree branches, tending to their created garden as it sprawled towards every corner of time and space, stretching out far and wide. As the universe grew, its sagas and tales were wound in the tapestry of time. Every event planned to happen when it was just so, every being bound to its fate, and letting destinies unfold. The planes of existence and its gods are hard for mortals to comprehend at the best of times, and truly they know little of what is beyond their world. So, our world. What do they know about it? Well, it's known as Uri, and also known as the seed of the World Tree. Uri is a vibrant world filled with all sorts of life, but life that often disagrees with one another. Very little is known of the origins of life and its past, but in the current age there is one far-reaching tale. That of the Day of Silence. It was a day that had followed on from centuries of storms and disasters. A time when the inhabitants of the world had to hide, taking shelter from the wrath of the outdoors. The Day of Silence was the day that the mortal beings emerged once more from their shelters, and when the world could start anew. The dawn of a new age. Civilization entered the usual ebbs and flows of empires rising and falling. Kings and queens being crowned and great explorers heading out to find out what is out there. Wars have been waged, battles won and battles lost. People making history, some just being forgotten. One event that none have really forgotten was in the year 651. It was an event that changed life on the continent of Thaldur, and further south the continent of Araldir. An almighty crack thundered out across the land, originating from the city of Ero, on the eastern coast. The city and the valley which it occupied was engulfed in some strange dark magic. A magic which baffled scholars and adventurers alike. Some managed to develop a way to travel into the city and the magic barrier that surrounded it. Within, they found bountiful treasure. However, the way in is kept secret by those known as divers. For 2 reasons. 1, to protect their bountiful treasure. 2, to actually protect people. The divers are renowned explorers. They formed guilds to harvest the spoils of the valley. The treasures that emerged from the Valley of Iro were hotly desired by noblemen and peasant alike. They became an indicator of your stature in society, an indicator of your wealth. If you owned these artifacts, you were clearly an important person. What was actually even more hotly desired in some ways was actually getting a diver to be part of your bodyguard or your forces, as they were seen as some of the most majestic warriors in the known land. 100 years passed from the day of the cracking, and the Union has continued to expand its borders, becoming the largest empire in Thaldur. It did this by convincing many a ruler to bend the knee, by either cunning, wit and politics, or by utilising the sword. The year is now 731. The Union, now only being held back from conquering the continent by the Zazupine dynasty of the north and the inhabitants of the slightly smaller continent Araldir in the south. Technology has advanced much since the cracking. Muskets have become rifles, horse carriages are now moved by huge mechanical beasts called trains, and science conflicts, often with beliefs. The world is a strange mixing pot of swords, magic, and steam. To the Union's east lies the Aurum coast, a region that currently holds a tentative peace. The leader there, the Coinmaster, offers much in the way of trade, and has used this to keep the Union on the good side. The Aurum coast is where our adventure begins. It is a rich and fertile land with many a large plantation of grape and fruit, wide-spanning fields to feed its denizens, and a wealthy trade industry spanning across the many towns and villages along the beautiful golden shoreline. It is a realm with a diverse community of many races from throughout the continents of Thaldur and Araldir. It has many different communities, traditions, and even some of the tribal orcs in the north have made their way south in search of a new life. However, it is a land not without its issues. Its inhabitants live in constant fear of raids from the Iceborne Isles further east. Those who live near the Locusan Ranges or the Darkvale Forest to the west must cope with wandering beasts and monsters from the peaks. To the south lies the border with the Union, a single valley spanned by a huge gate, an ever-present threat, despite the truce. Finally, to the north, the Orc tribes, threatening in their barbaric way of life, but kept at bay by the large spring river. With all the foes and dangers present, the region relies heavily on mercenaries to keep it safe. And while many of the people of this land know how to fight, they really have other jobs to make their ends meet. Let those who want to fight go and fight. And well, it's healthy for the job market. There's always something to do, and there's always a bit of coin to be earned. Our adventure began in the northernmost region of the Aurum coast, in the area north of the lavish city of Marquis. The cold breezes of winter starting to settle in as a regular feature of each day. The trees have lost their leaves, the nights are getting shorter, rain and sleet more common, and morning frosts becoming the norm. One thing is for sure, in this area it's wise to spend the night off the roads. There are many coach houses along the coastal road between Marquis and the other northern town of Orgrin. And our adventure began at one such coach house, the Dandy Owl. Here 4 adventurers and a sheep called Jeremy met. There was Tink the Orion, a sentient construct who is socially awkward but has an eye for fashion. He owns a shop in Marquis and likes to solve issues through conversation rather than conflict. Secondly, there is Galen, a holy warrior of the Ember Order, who is handy with a mason shield, but despite the namesake of Pyreheart, can't light a fire. Thirdly, there is Gillis, an exile of a nomadic tribe of druids who lives off the land, but in service to their Lord Rook, they have to also make sure they give back. Personally, he loves the rain and hates his friends. Finally, there is Mack, the Large Orc. In fact, he will be the largest orc you have ever seen. Recently, he was dethroned from his position of head of his clan by a young whippersnapper who beat him in combat. He might not be the brightest tool in the shed, but he certainly knows how to deal out the damage. He is also the master of Jeremy the Sheep, a fluffy and loyal companion. Tink, Galen and Mack had all met before, 3 months prior in fact. They had found themselves working on a mercenary contract together. They were out searching for a missing merchant in one of the most northern towns in the Aurum coast, a place called Ravenscrag. They did successfully find this merchant and a child that he had abducted, but only after some strange artefact had summoned him from a bizarre shadow. And well, when he emerged he wasn't exactly friendly, so they had to dispatch him. Back to our adventure at hand, though. During that night, whilst they were getting to know each other, a band of brigands attacked the pub. The group defended the patrons, putting their lives on the line. During this encounter, though, something strange was noted. Only one of these raiders was intent on killing. The rest just wanted to get out, as soon as they had stolen some food, drink, and horses. So after the fight, our group collected their thoughts. And whilst they would have been happy to just get on with their lives, it turned out that these raiders had taken Jeremy, and Mack was not happy. Our group decided to help Mack. And fortunately, Gillis had used some blood magic on the sheep, and was able to track the raiders' initial movements, and they worked out they were heading towards the local town of Tosca. These raiders, or the Toscan Raiders as they quickly became known by our group, passed through that small town, stealing more grain and livestock. Our group were hot on their heels, however. Unfortunately, they had no horses, and this did mean that they lost the blood magic trail. But, in Tosca, where the raiders had hit another farm, Fergal and Fergal's, our group managed to find a bit more information. Fergal's sheep's flock had been dwindled, and his prize ewe Daisy had been stolen. There was a wonderful battle of minds between Mack and one of the Fergals, and in all fairness it's a shame no bard was there to record it. But the trail renewed, and it led our group to the Slate Peak Mountains. Here, after a day's travel, they stumbled across the raiders. They had a makeshift camp deep in the forest. These raiders were from the Iceborne Isles, but they seemed only interested in surviving, claiming they had fled their homeland in the islands to the east. They had done so on the whim of their seer, a young blind woman called Alsa, who had been having visions of a safe haven somewhere within a mountainous forest on the shores to their west. This is what had led them here. This Iceborne clan were known as the Scowlvold Clan, and they were led by 2 individuals, Sachi and Capo, 2 strong warriors. And at this point our group decided that, well, it was probably a bit too much of a challenge to fight these people. But they also felt sympathy for their cause, and our group ended up deciding to help them. In exchange for finding their safe haven, the group would be able to keep any treasure they found, and, well, escape with their lives. After all, the Iceborne were just after a safe place to live. This led our group on a wild adventure deep within the Slate Peak forest. They managed to solve the seer's riddle of visions, and arrived at a sealed door hidden behind a waterfall. There was a puzzle to gain entry, and it did prove a rather hefty challenge, and it almost seemed as though our adventures in Uri would be rather short-lived. However, Tink, through a little luck, managed to open the harmonic lock that held the door tightly shut. Within this rock was an old city stronghold. It seemed to be built by dwarves and giants, a strange alliance. There was lots of ancient technology, and lots of dust. No one had been here for a very long time. The dark halls held a dark secret. Everyone in the city was dead, but peacefully arranged and all holding some form of cup or drinking horn. The group began to suspect some form of mass suicide. Within this city hibernated an ancient giant king, who, when disturbed, raised the dead with shadowy magics, demanding who disturbed his long rest. Our group managed to just survive. Beaten and bloodied, they rested before searching the king's feast hall. Here, they managed to take the king's stone staff and his makeshift crown. In his quarters they found the remains of a family, a wife and 2 children, but they also found a book, a journal of some kind, but written all in giant, and they could not understand it. At this point they decided that they should head back to the clan, to share their findings, and well, Gillis just wanted to go back outside. The dark rocks were starting to make him nervous. Here Tink took the crown and a cushion and made a beautiful makeshift thing for Mack, who proudly wore it. However, he decided his outfit was not complete without some form of woolen cape, which hung slightly off his back, not quite all the way to his hips. Upon their return to the camp, the Scowlvold were very happy with the group's work. There was an evening of joy, and they opened up to our group, and it became an opportunity to get some answers. It turned out that this clan disagreed with the new rulers of the Iceborne Isles, and as a result faced extermination because they would not bend the knee. So, against overwhelming enemies, they chose to flee. However, maybe now, due to the group's actions, they have a new home. Galen took this as an opportunity to suggest that the clan could look to tighten ties with the locals in Tosca, maybe provide some form of defence for them in exchange for them living in the forest. That evening, the clan began to dismantle their makeshift camp and head to the ancient city. Maybe one day we'll return here to find out how that all turned out. After this, the group decided they wished to know more about the objects that they had found, and try to decipher what actually happened in this ancient city within the forest. They decided that Marquis was their best bet. Marquis being the largest city in the northernmost coast, and seen as the final bastion of civilization before the more untamed lands that they find themselves in. As the group headed south, they returned past the Dandy Owl. Here they ran into a strange old elf, who took an interest in their items, and claimed he could be of help. This elf was known as Tan. He had eyes that couldn't sit still, and a rather pungent body odour. He claimed that he could decipher the book, and research the staff in exchange for a favour, finding a herb he needed for his experiments. Our group of adventurers eventually agreed, and after a quick bath for the elf and a good evening's rest, they ventured further south. Luckily, the herb the elf needed was a short detour off the road to Marquis, and well, it might be worth their effort. After navigating over a river and through a swamp, they did find the abandoned monastery that the herb was supposed to be at. What they did also find was some rather unfortunate souls who had been attacked. As our group ventured through the monastery, they discovered what had attacked these people. 3 shadowy knife hounds, saber-toothed wolves of sorts, ambushed them in the ruins. They shimmered with some sort of strange darkness. Once more, our group managed to just survive, and battered and bruised again, searched for the herb. They were successful in finding this herb, and at the same time, Tink also stumbled across a desecrated tomb belonging to a Cornelius Pyreheart, whose name had been scratched out of the rock and simply replaced by a scribble that read, "The Deathless One." On the unfortunate adventurers, they also found a brooch and a note of employment to return it to the Mercenary Guild in Marquis. Another free job. As the group settled down to rest, it was very clear that Tan was grateful. He began to cook with the herb, and he used it to provide himself with youthful clarity. Whilst in this state, he deciphered the giant's journal, and it was discovered that it seemed the Giant King had made a pact with some form of being in exchange for a long rest. He'd managed to convince all his subjects to drink a brew, and enter into a never-ending sleep. It was stated to be a better alternative to the war outside. The staff was inert. Tantan did identify it to be dwarven, but unfortunately the group would need a dwarven artificer to tell them more. This would mean going out and finding the long-lost dwarven empires in the mountains to the west. Our group decided that Marquis was still their best bet. They rested at the monastery that night and then headed south, Tantan joining them in their journey. Marquis is a beautiful city. It is Tink's home, and it's a wonderful hub of culture. It's an eclectic mix of different architectures and heritages, communities and traditions. It's a hub of trade and mercenary work. The city is overseen by a grand fort that sits on the cliffside, and the city itself spreads out into the plains surrounding the river. At the base of the cliff lies the Grand Port, nestled at its base and at the river's mouth. Once our group had arrived at Marquis, they set out exploring. Tink went to go check on his shop, and also went to go and seek an upgrade to help with his social skills. Galen went in search of an Ember Order outpost. He had questions that needed answers. Mack and Tantan, well, they went for a drink, and looked for a train, and bought some brushes, and got lost, and drunk. And finally Gillis, well, he got a little bit of alone time. It wasn't until the second day that things got a little hairy within the city for our group. The day started well. They returned the brooch for a bit of coin, and, well, Mack managed to deftly steal it straight back. After this, however, whilst working their way through the central market, they were targeted by a group of pickpockets. Orphans, who, unknown to the group, were targeting them for a specific reason. The relics that Mack was so brashly showing off. They fought off these orphans with what some might call a little bit too much force, but a point had been made. Later that day, after their trip to the train, our group was ambushed by some thugs. They were taken off guard and escorted whilst unconscious to some basement somewhere. Here they were accosted by some noble. None of the group knew, all except for Tink. He recognised the man as someone called Jeffron Friss. However, he never used that name. He introduced himself to the group as a Mr. Smith, the same name that was on the note that they found at the monastery on those unfortunate adventurers. Mr. Smith had little tolerance for the group's antics, and after... and a number of times he had little tolerance for the group's antics, and a number of times they ended up being shot by his henchmen or having knives thrown at them. But after some consideration of the group's responses, Jeffron decided that the group will put on a premium show for his clientele. Unknown to our group at the time, this involved a brawl to the death. The group had to pick their opportunity to escape. What was clear at this point is they were a long way up Shit Creek with no paddle in sight. The moment they picked was at the start of the first brawl. The two initial volunteers were Mack and Tantan. And, well, after some instructions from Galen, Mack grabbed hold of Tantan and whirled him round like a wrecking ball into the captors and the onlooking crowd. A brutal fight ensued, with many groins being vaporised. As the final beats of battle were being played out, a new figure emerged. They were a hooded individual, a woman with average build and smooth, dark tan skin. Most of her head, or what the group could see under the hood, was shaved short, and there seemed to be a long part that was braided and hanging just down to her shoulder on the side. The most striking feature about her, she had the dark purple eyes, the mark of a diver. Her movements were cat-like, She navigated the room without making a sound. As she strode into the room, she expertly slung daggers from her belt at the group's captors. In a swift set of motions, she killed all the witnesses to her presence. All apart from our group. She turned to them, asked them to trust her, and to follow her. Unsurprisingly, they did. She took our group to a small safe house, hidden in the Portside district. Here, the large crowds were useful in covering her activities. She beckoned the group inside, turning back once more to the door that she had just opened, muttering some more words in a language our group did not know, but seemingly they made the lock click shut. She turned to the group, identified that they probably got many questions, and said, "We should be safe here. Make yourself at home. Rest, sit. I shall make us a drink." And this is where our adventure currently stands. Our group, in what could be now the hostile city of Marquis, with an unknown hooded figure, who may have some answers to their many questions. But, well, if you want to find out more, find out why there is this diver called Tali, who she introduced herself right at the end, why she's actually in the city, what is the big plot that our group have found themselves in, well, you're just going to have to tune in and listen to some future episodes of the podcast, or maybe even join us when we go live on Twitch for our next episode. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little bit of a summary. Managed to fit what has been almost 20 hours of awesome gameplay into a 30-minute summary. Now, if any of those sections have interested you, just go back and have a listen to our podcast already. There's some utterly hilarious moments. Our group has a wonderful dynamic, and it's honestly one of the most fun games that I've ever been GM of. So, if you want to find out more, please go listen to the rest of our podcasts. You can find them on Anchor, probably a similar place to where you found this one. But what you could also do if you would like to support us and help us is find us on Twitter, find us on Instagram, find us on Twitch, YouTube, all of those places, and just hit that like, follow, subscribe button, share our podcast. We'd really appreciate all of the help and support that you can give us. We really enjoy doing this for you folks, so please, that free little bit of support that you can provide us would be greatly appreciated. So, this concludes episode 1 of Discussing Darkness. As said, not much of a discussion this time, more of a story time with me, OriginalJGR, but please come back, tune in to the next Discussing Darkness, where we'll be talking a little bit to our players about how they're finding the Fantasy Age system and what their thoughts are on what we've been doing so far, and that will be a really interesting discussion for us to have. But there will be plenty more things that we'll be looking at in future episodes, so stay tuned and find out what we're doing. So, I'm going to stop rambling there and let you get back to whatever it was you were doing. But thank you very much for spending the time listening to me talk about a world that we have created. So, thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.